Welcome to Intergalactic Tarboush, eclectic conversations from the Manor with Iyad al-Baghdadi and me, Ahmed Gatnash. We talk about politics, activism, tech, spirituality, mental health, and more.
This episode was recorded a few days before the invasion of Ukraine began, when a large part of us was hoping that there would be some kind of walk down instead of war. We were still speculating about Putin's motivations, and it was not clear how severe or irrational his actions would be, or how strong Europe's response and sanctions would be. This context will make it easier to understand Iyad and Ahmed's discussion.
Hey man, so guess what I did just today?
Tell me.
So I went down to the store and I got a waterproof Bluetooth player so I can put it in the shower so I can listen to podcasts in the morning.
I'm going in the opposite direction. I'm starting to, try and cut listening to audio because I realized that I'm basically like listening to stuff throughout the entire day and I have no space for my own thoughts anymore.
I mean, that does become a problem because like I did once try to increase, optimize my time to the point that I actually listen all the time. And I realized, you kind of need the silence. But then, I guess on the topic of podcasts, the last conversation we had, we were talking about cancel culture, and we had this line of thought that kind of came out of the Joe Rogan experience, and I mentioned how there's a bit of genius to 4-hour podcasts because you sit down with someone, if it's a very short thing, they can kind of prepare they prepare what they have to say. And they can kind of come across really, really well. And they can kind of, you don't really get to know who they are because they could actually put on a face. But it's a 4-hour podcast. Eventually, you really do get to know them, right? So I kind of appreciate that. But then I never had the time to actually listen to 4-hour podcasts. And, I'm not going to take 4-hour showers either. So like, it's not going to change anything.
Do you not listen on chipmunk speed?
I try, but there's always a limit. But you need to explain to the audience what chipmunk speed is.
Oh, chipmunk speed is when you're so desperate to optimize your time and cram stuff into a space that you start amping up the podcast playback speed. Yeah, I think after double speed you start to lose track of who's who because they all sound like chipmunks.
Oh, but how much can you retain at 2x? I
find that information delivery, like information per minute, is a lot slower in audio than it is when I read. So I actually start getting restless when I'm having to listen to, like these days I can't even stay with like a news broadcast because it's kind of slow. Even like YouTube videos, I normally put them up to 1.25.
Oh man, you wired your brain for like 2x.
Yeah, I just need that fire hose of information to be even pumping even harder.
I've started to wonder, like, honestly, I was having a conversation with someone yesterday. I was like wondering how social media has kind of rewired the way that we think, like rewired our brains. And one of those ways in which I have noticed it about myself is that I no longer have the patience to read a book or an article when I could just get the gist of it from a thread. Don't get me wrong, I still read books, I still enjoy reading. But a lot of the time I'm like, just give me get to the point already. I don't want the story, just get to the point, And so sometimes I appreciate that social media has kind of made us, consume information a different way.
You get the version without the fluff.
And I guess without the fluff, exactly. And that's why I kind of appreciate threads on Twitter. And that's why I'm thinking, maybe we should acknowledge that threads are actually a format now. They came up almost by accident. Not really by accident, but basically by it's kind of a necessity. You had tweets, and then people started replying to themselves, so that to make a thread, and then Twitter jumped on that. As like, yeah, let's make that native.
Yeah, and I wonder what this looks like when you extrapolate it like 50 years or 200 years. Like, imagine a scenario in which kids are being educated with threads.
Threads, exactly. I don't know if... we kind of went through that when we were writing our book, And I actually had to send something to the editor and say, you know, like, what is the right way to write a citation for a quote, for a tweet? Because now it is a source, you know?
Yeah.
Especially if it's like a verified account, and, you know, you can always see if this person said this, you know? It's really interesting. I think we're kind of, you know, we're too close to something really big, like the internet, social media, etc. I think that they're really history changing, but we're too close to them to really see their impact.
Yeah, it's like in the, what do you call it, like the Gutenberg era, where you're starting to get mass production of books, and like probably nobody thought what happens when 1 million people can read this. You're just thinking, oh, let me have this treatise on reform of the church be more widely available, not how does this change the entire education system, and how does this shake the foundations of political power when information is more widely available, and what does universal literacy look like?
I think there is a deeper angle here. I think that the definition of humanity itself is expanding because of this contact. Think of it this way: like, if, you know, the human race, you know, not Homo sapiens, but really before that, Homo erectus, basically, you know, is around 2 million years old, right? For the majority of our life on this planet, we lived in small family units or clans or tribes. We did not really interact with others, and a lot of these interactions were either trade or war. A lot of the interactions were violent. And I suppose that our definition for humanity was really limited to the people around us, to our tribe or our village or our hunting group or whatever. And I think that with time, with more contact and with more contact technology, communication technology, of course, like it would be thousands of years before we even had technology. I think the definition of who is and is not, I mean, even the colonial era, for example, they were talking about civilized and savage. I mean, the word barbarian itself comes from a Greek word, which means, you know, someone who can't speak Greek. I guess, you know, two things happened very recently. First is the globalization.
What you're basically saying is that it's easier to otherize people when you don't have some kind of intercommunication.
Yeah, and there was no footage, you know, like basically something happens across the world, you have no idea about it, of course, how do you care about it? And so it's easy to kind of say, you know, these people, I don't even have to think about them. Essentially, the definition of humanity, when we say humanity, basically, in a certain way, means people who have the same rights as us, people who have the same condition as us, people who are like us, you know? I think that the definition kept expanding with time, and I think it took a huge leap when we had the globalization of the English language, where people from many different cultures, many different languages can speak in the same language, which came, of course, with the internet. And then we had social media, which, you know, kind of, I can speak to anybody. I can just tweet something, and maybe the first person who reads it might be in Brazil, or, you know, in Portugal, or you know, in China, or whatever. I think that this is, you know, it's there is a social, a philosophical, political impact, etc., an impact as to our real definition of what humanity is, but we're just way too close to it to see it. But I think it's really big.
I'm not grasping this, I don't think, so I'm going to have to sit with it for a while.
Yeah, or maybe we could, you know, maybe we'll expect one of our audience members to kind of throw something back at us, or essentially say that, you know what, this is a stupid idea. Think of something else.
Yeah, I want somebody to explain this to me better. I guess you could see it as people who belong to different tribes or even empires at one point, seeing people from outside that group as being like almost an alien species. Like, the definition of humanity is kind of something quite modern now, because we all see ourselves as being one species, whereas previously those political divides, well, at different times they were a lot harder.
No, but there was, I mean, there was scientific racism. There was. I mean, even our history, the idea that we all came from Africa, the species basically came from Africa, was controversial. Like 100 years ago, even less than 100 years ago. I mean, when I was studying this in school, we were kind of taught the history of the idea. Of course, they taught us that this is how it is now. This is basically the science on this now. But they're like, there was other theories that assumed that different human races, first of all, that races existed, but also that different human races evolved separately from each other, almost like there's actual biological differences between different human beings. Between basically that we don't even come from the same, we didn't even evolve from the same population. So there was scientific racism. The definition of humanity itself has evolved.
So from the very big to the much smaller, and I'm still thinking about Russia and Putin. It was quite interesting when you mentioned. So I saw like a news article about the meeting Emmanuel Macron had with him, and how he came out of it like a 6-hour meeting, saying this guy is bizarrely obsessed with history and doesn't stop talking about it, and that fascinated me. I didn't get the reason why. And then you said something like he's a 70-year-old man who knows he's going to die soon, so he's become obsessed with his legacy.
His legacy. I mean, this is one interpretation. To be honest, I'm not completely sure. There are people who think... So first of all, by the time this episode comes out, the world is going to look different. I hope that by the time this comes out, we don't have a war. But it's quite possible that there will be a war. But it's still going to be relevant to speak about Putin and his personality. I remember seeing two things on my timeline. One was about, is there something wrong with him? Is there kind of an illness? Something, like, did he have a personality change in the last few years?
Reminds me of a lot of Gaddafi speculation about his...
Gaddafi and even Saddam Hussein. Gaddafi, absolutely, he was nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, but with Putin, there's this speculation that there has been a recent change, and some people are speculating that maybe it's COVID. Basically, he has kind of something happened, I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's really credible, but it's interesting that people who know him is like, he has kind of changed somehow as he became darker in the last few years. And the second really is this idea that maybe he's obsessed with his legacy. Maybe he is an old man. He's been, on top of the Russian state for 20 years. He realizes that at some point he has to make transition plans, kind of plans of, what comes next for Russia. And he's at an age where he has to think about his legacy. Which kind of reminds me of a thing that I was talking to a friend recently. And I was talking about myself because, I'm 44 and I'm going to be 45, right? And I've been kind of thinking about my workout routine, because I haven't been working out for a while. I had like an injury and I was waiting for it to heal. And then after that, inertia took over and I didn't really pick up another exercise routine, right? And I was thinking, at 45, I'm not at a fuck it age, like if I was 20, I was like, if I have a problem, I'll fix it later. I'm still young, if I'm 30, I'm like, yeah, I mean, I still have a few years. I can tolerate that. If I'm 60 or 70, I'm like, again, I'm at like a fuck it age because I'm too old now, but then at 40, I'm like, no, I still have like 20, 30 years. I have to fix this. So I'm thinking Putin probably doesn't think that way because he's a leader and he's on top of a country. It's like, no, I mean, now I have a legacy. I have to think about this.
Well, the strange thing is most people who kind of have that psychological crisis at his age might go out and do something crazy like blow their retirement money on a sports car or, I don't know, try and marry someone half their age or something. Instead, Putin tries to invade a neighboring country. But it's like the same small man psychology at play, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, of course, let's not exaggerate the fact that there are valid geopolitical reasons for his actions. Never mind the unhinged history that the completely crazy ethno-nationalist history, but there are we spoke about it in the last episode about how there are geopolitical elements. And we might be touching upon this also on our other podcast, the Arab Tyrant Manual, at some point. But one thing that I found really interesting is really this intersection between. This was an idea or a kind of a thought that we were discussing a while ago. How Bitcoin fits into this, because we know that like this whole questions like, why doesn't Putin decide to pursue kind of industrial scale Bitcoin mining as a way to raise funds? What do you think about that?
There's also another angle to that, which is the North Korean policy, which is, Russia kind of has the same natural resource of a lot of people who are very good at science, maths, computer programming, etc. What North Korea does is it takes them, puts them to work in the cyber division of the military and has them hacking companies and banks, etc. around the world, and, launching ransomware attacks, etc. and trying to gather all this money in cryptocurrencies and then trying to, launder it in order to be able to fund a part of the state budget because they're so tight on money. And I was thinking, if Putin does take this too far and Russia ends up even more heavily sanctioned, he's going to have a big economic problem on his hands. And this is probably the kind of way that a thug would try to solve that, raising money through illicit sources. He'll probably turn to organized crime and sponsoring organized crime throughout Europe. He'll probably turn to cyber weapons and hacking, ransomware, that kind of thing, stealing money. And he'd probably turn to cryptocurrency because it's anonymous. It's kind of resistant to tracking, not impossible to track, but it can make it a little harder if you're skilled. And because you basically can convert energy directly into money, because you use the energy to power Bitcoin mining machines on a mass scale, and produce Bitcoin, which is inflation resistant and appreciates over time. And you add that to the state budget.
So I have a feeling that if he does that, I don't think so. First of all, there's no evidence that this was part of his war preparations. I think so. It could be that he's preparing that as one of his options. But if you look at what he did ahead of the recent events, so he tried to basically sanction-proof the ruble by building up his reserves, mostly foreign currency and gold. This is to back the currency, right? So it's not for the budget. It's not exactly going to spend it on people, but he's basically to stabilize his currency, which means he still believes in his currency, right? The thing is, if he pursues, large-scale Bitcoin mining, and this becomes a thing, usage of Bitcoin kind of becomes normalized inside Russia, it's going to have a damaging impact on the ruble because people, I was actually talking to Alex Gladstein recently about this point, and he's like, this is kind of a Trojan horse, because if he does this, he's going to wreck the ruble. He's going to lose control of the economy then.
It's a disaster in multiple ways, because A, you end up with capital flight because people start dumping the ruble to buy Bitcoin, and B, you push your own population towards a currency which is harder for you to control or surveil. So the only way this would work is if you build state capacity for Bitcoin mining whilst keeping possession of Bitcoin illegal. So it's something you can do, but not the population.
Exactly. So this is what I was going to get to. This is going to be really interesting if Russia becomes the biggest miner of Bitcoin, a state-level miner of Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is banned in the country.
And that would, so that's a long-term play. That would take years to build up the capacity in mining because, the world supply chain in microchip manufacture is incredibly centralized. And it's been shown to be very vulnerable over the last couple of years. You have car production plants across the world which are idle because they can't get the microchips that the cars need. So that would have to be built up over years. And it would be interesting to see if they do that, how it would happen, whether it would be detected in advance and whether, other countries would try to stop it. If it ever did happen, it would be very concerning because then you even have the possibility of other countries treating Bitcoin as a hostile tool of the enemy. because it's giving Putin, sanction resistance.
I mean, they kind of already are. I mean, a lot of people are talking about Bitcoin as a threat to institutions, a threat to democracy, etc. I think this is kind of really
but that's more on a theoretical. It's more on a theoretical level at the moment. If it was ever proven that this is being used at a large scale, then that would be totally different.
Yeah, but I remember this is kind of the same arguments that was said about encrypted messages. When before Signal, when we had Wicker, etc. This is like going to enable money laundering, etc. Now it's accepted as one of our.
At one point back in, I don't know if it was the 80s or the 70s, encryption technology was banned. Like it was classified as a weapon by the US, and you couldn't leave the country with it. Like there were...
Yeah, PGP was, and that's how the PGP... Basically, the person who wrote the PGP protocol, I think, fled to Sweden, or kind of sent the code to Sweden to be compiled there, because otherwise...
I think he did something... There's some strange story, like he had it printed on a T-shirt because that was different from smuggling code.
I do not know about that story.
Yeah, I think they tried some creative ways to get like a freedom of speech defense, and then eventually like the whole attack on it collapsed, and they just acknowledged that you can't censor software, which again, interestingly, is the exact same area that Bitcoin's falling under. Like in the long run, you can't censor software.
Yeah. I mean, exactly, because, is software speech? It's an interesting question. But anyway, I mean, let's pick it up in the next conversation. I mean, Bitcoin is still your obsession and still going to be your obsession next week.
Yep. See you next time.
See you next week.
Thanks for listening. To support us, please leave a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also find the link to our Patreon in the episode description. See you next time.